Welcome to another edition of the Kal Korff TV Show. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. Folks, today we have a very special show. It's about vultures. You might say, well, why would we talk about vultures? Well, vultures are critical for the survival and healthy state of our precious ecosystem and environment. They are nature's cleaners. Now, vultures are not sexy in the minds of people. If somebody is called a vulture, it's not a positive thing. They don't get all the glamorous attention that some other wildlife does, like lions and tigers and some of the exotic birds like eagles. Vultures, however, once again play a very critical role in the ecosystem. The problem is that they are among some of the most endangered species in the world. In India, the vulture population has been decimated, not because of predators or nature, but because of man, and specifically a chemical developed by pharmaceutical companies, which is killing them. Joining us are several esteemed scientists from around the world who are going to educate you about this vital issue and explain why the survival of the vulture is not only critical to our precious ecosystem, but they're going to talk about the efforts they're doing, which are truly heroic, to save this species. Some of the guests, again, are some of the top scientists in this area, and joining them is Daily World's CEO, who will ask and moderate some of these questions.
My name is Padam Prakash Gujral, and I'm a Chief Wildlife Warden of Haryana. Today, I would like to say something on the vulture population in India and its future.
Okay, let me ask you a quick question. Most people, when they think of vultures, they don't have a positive image.
Yes.
Why are vultures important, and why should people care about the issue of what a vulture does or doesn't do?
Vultures are, I'll say, natural engineers. They clean up the system. In ordinary words, in the mundane English, we call them scavengers. I remember when I was around 32, 33, I used to see in the countryside of Haryana, where I worked as DFO, Divisional Forest Officer, a group of 600 to 700 vultures every evening scavenging on dead carcasses. But now, even the scientific word says that there are hardly any vultures around. In fact, the population has crashed from more than 4 crores to few thousands in a span of less than 20 years. So the point is that the vultures, which don't look very pretty as compared to the romantic wildlife such as tiger and the elephant, they are not really into the mind of people who really matter, as in the affluential people. But when you go to the countryside, the villagers still remember the poor vulture, which did a lot of good for their health, for the cleanliness of the environment, and so on.
Okay, so you mentioned a steep drop in the population of the vulture. Are they endangered now in India?
Yes. Now, a couple of species, like the white jib, they are in the Schedule 1. However, there are others, like Himalayan griffin, which are not endangered, but still their number is very, very little.
So would you say that the overall population is endangered or heading that way, or are there groups of vultures that the population numbers are just fine?
Now, overall population of all the vultures is going down in India, but few species, they are at the threshold level where there is a danger of becoming them extinct.
I am Vikramjeet Singh. I am a journalist and a columnist, and I have been covering the vulture conservation project in Haryana, Pinjore, since 2001 when the inception took place. To the question of whether vultures are declining, vultures are not just declining in South Asia, they're also being affected in Europe and in Africa. And one of the main reasons is poisoning of the carcasses on which vultures eat. In India, the poisoning is occurring because cattle farmers inject cattle with a veterinary drug called diclofenac, which relieves cattle of pain and inflammation. But that veterinary drug, when injected into a cattle, turns into a poison for vultures when vultures feed on that dead cattle. In Africa, vultures are dying because poachers and herders lace their cattle with poison for various reasons. For example, if a lion kills a buffalo or a cow in Africa, the owner will put poison in it so that when the lions come to eat again, the lions will die. But unfortunately, vultures come to eat also, and vultures die. In Europe also, secondary poisoning of vultures through carcasses and other sources is killing vultures. In Europe, another thing called wind farming, like in Spain, 1,000 griffon vultures die every year because of crashing into wind farms. Generally speaking, raptors or birds of prey like falcons, hawks, buzzards are one of the first set of birds to take a hit by contamination of the environment through pesticide poisoning, through other sources of poisoning, through prey which is injected with, which has residues of pesticide in it. Okay. To the question of vultures being, how endangered are vultures? 3 species of vultures in India are critically endangered. What are called the gyps vulture, the white-backed vulture, the long-billed vulture, and the slender-billed vulture are critically endangered vultures to the extent that they are amongst a set of birds which have suffered the most rapid declines ever witnessed in the history of mankind. Documented declines. Their decline is so rapid to the extent that 99% of vultures, of these 3 vulture species, have declined in the last 10 to 20 years. I reiterate again, the most rapid declines witnessed in a set of birds are these 3 gyp species of India.
You were mentioning that the population of vultures is dropping to an alarming rate to where they're on the endangered species list. What has the response of the Indian government been to this? Do they agree with you, and are they supportive of efforts to reverse the situation? Can you detail for us what is being done right now, if the Indian government is taking the right steps?
The Indian government has taken a very strong step. That way back in 2006, after the first alarm bells were rung, that diclofenac, the veterinary drug, is the main reason for the decline of the vultures. They imposed a ban way back in 2006. That ban was replicated in the rest of the countries in South Asia like Nepal and Bangladesh and Pakistan, following the Indian model. So there has been a positive response at the Government of India's level to the decline in vultures, because it realizes the crucial value that vultures play in the Indian ecosystem, not just as disposers of carcasses, but also as great assistants to hide collectors and bone collectors, which is a big industry in India, because after all the leather industry is based on the hide of cattle, and it is a multi-100 crore export industry in India is the hide collection. And the bone industry, which feeds off the bones of cattle, is also a very productive industry in India, and a lot of common people or the underprivileged people benefit from such industries. So the Indian government's main thrust has been to ban diclofenac. Then we've had a very good example from the Haryana government. The Haryana government has put its head and put its shoulder to the project in Pinjore to breed vultures in captivity. It has lent institutional support by way of staff support, by way of giving land for this project, by way of putting its field staff to monitor vultures, to spread awareness in the field that we don't need to treat our cattle with a killer drug like diclofenac. The Haryana government has maintained this support irrespective of who the political party was in power in the state government, which is a very important thing. So I feel, in a sense, the Haryana government has almost institutionalized support for the vulture conservation program. And that is the key to our conservation efforts. Without political and bureaucratic will, saving a species on this scale is next to impossible, because otherwise we will have only vulture scientists giving us technical recommendations and fine and high sounding things, and at the ground level there will be no translation of those recommendations. And this is where I think the Haryana government's model is something worthy of all states to follow.
As Vikram has said that Haryana government has been playing a very important role in the overall issue of vultures. I'll say that he spoke on the issue of the legislation and policy part, but the real life experiment and biological part was basically done by the Bombay Natural History Society, the scientists and representatives of that society, along with their partners from the UK, which is Royal Bird Society. And Haryana government provided the infrastructure in terms of space, in terms of resources where this could be done. So that started in early 2000, and I'll request our panelist Dr. Vibhu to give detailed information on short story of the long innings, 15 years, which have been played at the Pinjore Center.
Hello, I am Vibhu Prakash. I am a principal scientist with Bombay Natural Society. And vultures were very common in this country till about mid-90s, when we were monitoring populations in different parts of the country, and we realized that they were declining, and they were declining very fast. So by mid-90s, we had lost about 90% of the vulture population. And when we saw the vulture population was declining, we tried to find out what was the cause of mortality. So we found a lot of dead birds, so we picked them up and did postmortems, and we found that all of them were suffering from a condition called visceral gout. And visceral gout is a condition when there is a kidney failure, and the uric acid the vultures cannot excrete out uric acid and gets deposited on the visceral organs. And so by 2000 we realized that 95% of the population is gone, and we didn't have a clue why they were declining. So we looked at habitat, and we looked at food, we looked at pesticide contamination, and all possible ecological reasons which could have caused crash in vulture population. But we found that none was a problem. Then finally in 2003, American scientists who were working in Pakistan, they found that the vultures were declining in that country also, and they also had very similar results to what we got, that they were dying of visceral gout. But additionally what they found out, all the vultures which had died of visceral gout also had this drug diclofenac in them. And then we also looked for presence of diclofenac in vulture tissues in our country, and we found that 76% of the vulture population had died of visceral gout, and all the birds which had visceral gout also had diclofenac residues in them. So there was a very strong correlation and indication that the diclofenac was indeed killing vultures. And diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug which is given to cattle in pain and inflammation, and is a very, very effective drug for cattle and humans. It is one of the few drugs which can break the blood-brain barrier, and you get relief within 15 minutes. But it is a deadly poison for vultures. It's almost like cyanide is for humans. So if a cattle dies within 72 hours of administration of this drug and vultures feed on it, they die. And that was killing them. So when we realized that the diclofenac was killing vultures, and diclofenac was very widely available, and we also realized that we had lost over 95% of the population, we all experts and decision makers, and we all sat together in Parwanu in Himachal Pradesh and formulated a vulture recovery plan. And this vulture recovery plan was incorporated in Government of India's Vulture Action Plan in 2006. And the action plan gave us 3 major recommendations to save these vultures from extinction. One was, of course, to ban the veterinary use of this diclofenac. Second was to find an alternative to diclofenac. And third was to set up a conservation breeding program, because the population has crashed to that extent that it was thought that unless active conservation measures are taken, it will be difficult to bring vultures back from the verge of extinction. So Government of India acted very swiftly, and in 2006 they banned this drug for veterinary use. And then the Bombay Natural Society, in collaboration with our international partners, the Royal Society of Protection of Birds and Zoological Society of London, we all tried to find out a safe drug for vultures. So we did a global search of all the drugs which are used to treat vultures and raptors, and we found there's a drug called meloxicam, which is also an NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like diclofenac, which was quite widely used but had never caused mortality in vultures or raptors. So we, in collaboration with the Indian Veterinary Research Institute and Haryana Forest Department, conducted a safety testing of this drug at Pinjore, where we have a conservation breeding center in Haryana. And we found that this drug was safe, because what happens in a NSAID toxicity, the uric acid levels in the blood goes very high. But when we gave meloxicam to the vultures, nothing happened, and the vultures were safe. And meloxicam is in fact a second generation drug, which is extremely good for cattle and is good for vultures also. So we suggested this drug to Government of India, and they banned the diclofenac, and they suggested that meloxicam should be instead used. And then side by side we also established the vulture conservation breeding centers, and the first centers were established at Pinjore in 2004, and then at Rajabhat Khawa in West Bengal, and then in Assam in Rani. And subsequently the Central Zoo Authority, also in collaboration with Bombay Natural Society, established 4 more centers. And now our centers, the breeding is going on well in the centers. The diclofenac, after the ban, its prevalence has gone down. But in 2008, we realized that the vultures were still dying, and we found out that it was because the multi-dose vials of diclofenac, which were for human use, were being misused by people who treat cattle, especially the untrained veterinarians, and vultures continued to die. So we approached Government of India and requested them to ban the multi-dose vials and allow only the use of 3 ml vials for human use. And fortunately, in 2015, they restricted the size of the vials for human use to just 3 ml. And now we hope that the prevalence of diclofenac will come down. We did also find that there are some other drugs which are also causing mortality, but diclofenac prevalence of it was coming down. So in 2016, since we had good population of birds which are bred in the centers, and the prevalence of diclofenac had gone down, we thought of starting a reintroduction program in the wild. So on the 3rd June of 2016, we released 2 Himalayan griffins. Himalayan griffins are not critically endangered like the 3 gyp species which we are working on, but they are very similar to our gyp species, the vultures which we have in captivity. And so we released them just to see what actually happens, whether they are able to survive in the wild or they are able to fly around, because we had kept them in captivity. There are a lot of apprehensions that the birds which have been kept in captivity won't be able to fly or won't be able to find food. So just to see whether if these birds are able to survive, find food and all, then we will release our critically endangered bird back in the wild. But unfortunately, we didn't have permission to put satellite tags on them. So since we didn't have any tracking device on them, we could follow them only for 45 days, and then we could not follow them because they started flying very high and disappeared. And now we are thinking of releasing our captive bred critically endangered white-backed vultures, but we will be able to do it only if we have permissions to put the satellite tag, and the environment around the center is safe to release them.
When you release the birds in the wild and you could track them for at least a couple of days before it became impossible to do so, Were you able to get enough data to determine whether the reintroduction program was a success?
Well, we could follow these birds for 45 days, but we had a team of, we had 20 people looking at it. And initially the bird would go short distances and most of the while was sitting perched, but then gradually after 15 days started flying a little more distance than the earlier, and then by end of the month it was soaring very high in the sky. And initially we were provisioning food. It will come down to have food with other vultures, and it then subsequently started finding its own food, own source of water, and then it will be seen with other wild birds. So when it left us after 45 days, we were quite sure that the birds were safe and they were able to adjust to the environment. But if we had tracking device, we would have been certain what has really actually happened.
Hello. You mentioned a little earlier that the vulture population has gone down by over 90 to 95%. Presumably, when the population was at its peak, all vultures had enough food to eat in the form of carcasses. Now that we are down to only 5%, what is happening to those 95% carcasses which the vultures were earlier eating? How are they being disposed of?
Hello, my name is Toby Gallagher and I'm a conservation scientist for the RSPB Centre for Conservation Science in the UK. We're BirdLife partners with BNHS, BirdLife being an global organisation, so we support BNHS in all their work that they've been doing on vultures. So the question was what's happening to carcasses now that vultures are not there to consume them. And there's obviously there's a lot of carcasses, and in different situations different things may be happening. With the absence of vultures, secondary scavengers are becoming more common, and one of the most common are feral dogs. So feral dogs are what we call facultative scavengers, so they're not actually as well designed scavenging as vultures are. So they don't consume as much of the carcass as a vulture would, and therefore leave a lot of the tissue for other scavengers. Other scavengers can include things like maggots, fungi, but perhaps more concerning, microbes that are disease-causing. And in some areas where the dogs can't access, we have whole carcasses just decaying and largely being consumed by these disease-causing microbes.
Now, you mentioned disease-causing microbes. Can you give us some specific examples? What kinds of diseases and why are they a danger to people?
As Toby said, now since we don't have vultures, there's a lot of carcasses which rot. A dead animal is like a culture medium of fungus and bacteria. So as soon as a death takes place, fungus and bacteria start growing on the dead animal, and they form spores and then go into the soil and they pollute soil and water. But what was happening earlier was as soon as a death takes place, vultures will come and finish off before this bacteria and fungus can grow. And they were in such great numbers that whenever there was a carcass, they would come and they will cover up the carcass. So the stray dogs or the dogs which were there, they would have no chance in getting any food from the carcasses. But now the vultures are not there, so the dogs get to eat the carcasses. And dogs are cannibals, so usually they litter at isolated places because other dogs don't eat their pups. But now what is happening, you will have dogs littering at the carcass dumps. In fact, they litter in the rib cages of the cows, which are the carcasses of the cows. And the pups which grow up carcass dumps, they are ferocious. So whenever they come across humans or animals, they attack. And they actually attack like they're a wild pack of dogs. And dogs carry any number of diseases, and rabies is one of them. So incidences of rabies have of course gone down since the decline in vulture population, but as such, rabies is a very common disease in a country because of high population of dogs. So it's very difficult to say to quantify by what percentage the disease has increased because of the decline in population. And the other thing is when the microbes go into soil and water, they whenever they come across a healthy host, they attack. And diseases like tuberculosis or brucellosis or leptospirosis, they have grown. Their incidences have gone up. But again, quantification is difficult because incidences of such diseases as such are very high in this country. To say by what percentage the diseases have gone up because of vulture decline is a little bit difficult. But circumstantial evidence do suggest strongly that this is happening.
Is anthrax one of the diseases to be concerned about?
Well, of course, yes. Anthrax is a disease, but anthrax is now it's now not very common in this country, and sometimes you have eruptions of epidemics of not really epidemics, some eruptions in certain places. And vultures, they are known to digest the bacteria, which anthrax bacteria. So as soon as the death takes place, and the vultures can feed on it, so they can digest that and they can control anthrax.
Well, the problem of disposing of carcasses on that scale in India is now a real concern in the countryside, because we don't have vultures, and we have bad scavengers like dogs multiplying around these carcass dumps, as Dr. Prakash explains. So now certain governments are asking people to bury the carcasses. For example, around Dehradun, the forest department asks people to bury the carcasses. In Maharashtra, we are hearing discussions in the government that they are going to be issuing a policy measure that people should bury their carcasses, which were early put out in the open. The third factor which is coming in is the government scheme for modern carcass disposal plants, where there are going to be modern incinerators where people are going to take their carcasses and get them incinerated. But that raises parallel costs of, the kind of money farmers need to pay for disposing of livestock which are dead. Very interestingly, the vulture is not a bird which is just a beautiful, which is a bird in the environment or part of our national biodiversity, and we need to conserve it because it's another bird. It also has a great economic value. It is not something which is of no economic value to India's vast and diverse countryside. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has undertaken a study to find out that what each vulture gives to the country in terms of economic values. And they found in that study that each vulture was contributing 5 to 6 lakh rupees in terms of economic value by disposing of our carcasses free. Okay? And as somebody very rightly remarked, vultures are quality control engineers of our countryside. They are not a charismatic species like the tiger or the elephant or the rhino, but they are performing a great role for us. And we need to see that they're not because they look ugly to us, and we use vultures as a figure of speech or as a metaphor for ugliness, as augury of death. But these guys are not just auguries of death, they are actually waiting to clean up death and make life move on by not letting death be a hangover for the countryside.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Do you feel that you have the resources necessary to have turned this problem around back in the direction it should go, or do you have yet to get there?
We are yet to get there. There is now realistic and serious thinking of how to tackle the carcasses in the countryside for various reasons, as our honorable panelists have discussed about the explosion of the dog population, for example, the disease factor, the fact that the stink which carcasses raise by rotting. You see the what you call the nasal, or I think the olfactory pollution is because of rotting carcasses for days and days. If you just go to a carcass dump and there are dogs or there are no vultures and no dogs, just see the amount of the smell which is pervading the countryside. So, as I said, burying the carcasses, modern carcass disposal plants, these are measures in that direction.
Speaking of the disposal plants, you mentioned the issue of it would raise the cost to farmers. Why doesn't the government, as part of a taxpayer service, say we'll dispose of the carcasses for you, you bring them, we'll burn them? Why don't they do it that way as a free service? Why should a farmer have to pay? Because a farmer can't always control when he gets carcasses. There's many different causes of it. So has the government considered just making it a standard service, like it's supposed to provide clean water to its citizens? Or is it always going to be something that a farmer has to bear the burden of?
I think that's a very relevant question. There is already going to be built-in subsidy into the setting up of the plant and the kind of costs that the farmer will pay for incinerating each cattle carcass that he gets to be dumped. So there's going to be inbuilt subsidies. But the question now arises that in India, where we are stricken increasingly for financial resources, to what extent do we subsidize the farmer? Because, carcasses don't die in a few hundreds a year or a few hundreds a week. India has an enormously huge cattle livestock industry. And they're not just cattle, there's so many other, we have goats, we have donkeys, a lot of these kinds. So somewhere or the other, the government will have to, as you rightly said, subsidize the cost for a farmer to take his dead cattle or dead livestock and get them incinerated. But it's a tricky question because the subsidies involved are very high. We're already talking of fertilizer subsidies running into thousands of crores. We are talking of water subsidies running into thousands of crores. So where do we subsidize and make the farmer pay the real cost also, so that it just doesn't become a free thinking kind of thing, Because, for example, you subsidize water and make it free. The farmer is tempted to overuse it and overexploit ground resources. So these are very tricky questions, and I think it's a very relevant question because the Indian farmer is stricken also for financial resources. So I think these things need to be discussed down to a very deep level.
You mentioned that the vulture population in the mid-90s was probably at its peak. Would you be having some idea of the numbers? What was the total population in the country? And compared to that, all the breeding programs which are going on, I believe, in 7 centers now, how many vultures have you been able to successfully rear in these breeding programs? And even if all these are released, will it make a significant difference in bringing us back to our earlier ecology, or will it just be a drop in the ocean, to satisfy our scientific urges, etc.?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. By mid-90s, we noticed that the vultures declining. In fact, vulture population was at the peak probably in late 80s, and we had an estimate of about 4 crore vultures, 40 million vultures in the country. And this is based on the transect surveys we carry out across the country in various national parks and sanctuaries. And now we had lost, by 2007, we know that we had lost about 99% of the population. So we are left with less than 100,000 vultures. And the vulture conservation breeding program, that is established as an insurance against extinction. It's impossible to breed so many vultures as they were there and they required, but this is just to make sure that all the vultures don't just disappear. So we had that number of vultures in our breeding center. As Mr. Vikramji said, it was the fastest decline in the world. And vulture is a slow breeding and long living bird. So normally its population, you have mortality of 5% in the vulture population, but if the mortality rate in adult vultures go up by 5%, then extinctions become a possibility. And what we witnessed was a decline in population of more than 40%. and that could have certainly caused extinction of vultures. And although we know that there are 100,000 vultures, but when we lost 4 million vultures almost in 20 years, so if things go the same way and we don't consider conservation, these 100,000 vultures will disappear very soon. So that's why conservation breeding program is very important, just to make sure that we have sufficient genetic diversity of the vultures left in the country, and once we have removed the cause of mortality, we will be able to release them and they can repopulate.
So the way forward,
So
what would be the way forward?
Go ahead, action.
So basically, as my colleague has said, that it is sort of an attempt for ex situ conservation of the gene pool of the 3 gyps species. The numbers is very small, but the contribution will be very large in the long run. As we have already pointed out that there are more than 100,000 vultures in nature also. So what we intend to do is that from this year onwards, release 20 pairs every year into the nature. And these will make association or form a fork with the wild vultures. That's why, as told earlier also, the release is not abrupt. It is a soft release. First, the captive bred vultures, they are kept in aviaries where there are chances of their getting acclimatized or seeing at least the vultures which exist in nature. And this can be shown in the videos during the panel. And once they have become used to seeing these vultures from wild, then slowly we'll release them. The purpose of release is also to understand that the experiment has been successful to the extent that they will go out and behave like the natural vultures or not. That's why we are making a sort of appeal through this communication to the nation, that it is very important for us to have the telemetry techniques to sort of follow the fate of these released vultures. You also pointed out that is it sufficient in terms of numbers, in terms of resources we have put in. I will straightforward and without any hiccup, I will say no, it is not, but it is a beginning which has been made. And let me tell you that to raise one vulture, as my colleague said, they cost more than 50,000 in terms of food only. And then you have trained manpower, people traveling from abroad, so they are very costly to us. We don't want to lose them once we release them into the nature. But the spread of this small effort to 7 more centers in India and now to the neighboring countries also, I think will complement each other, the efforts, and enhance their values in near future. Let me also add here that we are also sort of worried about when these vultures are released, what will happen to them when they fly to the other boundaries. They don't need any passports or railway tickets to go to the different states. We are doing it in Haryana, and there are 7 states which border Haryana. So on 21st and 22nd of November, we had a meeting of our counterparts, the foresters, the veterinary doctors, the animal husbandry, drug controllers, where we showed them the efforts we have made, and we told them that we are going to release these vultures into the area, and each vulture has a range of 100 kilometers radius. That was the purpose of calling just the 7 states, and tell them, that this is a very important experiment. The costs are very high. The chances of success are also very high if we get the total support from them. The main purpose of this workshop was to sensitize these government officials as well as the other stakeholders like the animal husbandry doctors. And what has come out of the proceedings is that these states have agreed that they will be ready to sponsor the orientation of all their veterinary doctors to this concept as well as the problem. So, though it is a small beginning, it is I think it is very significant in the long run.
I just add one, a question which comes across in the minds of the public is a very simple and elementary, fundamental question. That if there were 4 crore vultures of the 3 gyp species in 1980, and now we have a reintroduction program by breeding them in captivity, will we ever come back to those levels? We should be very realistic about it. We will never come back to those levels ever again. The vultures which are being bred in these centers are being bred at great cost, and they are like an insurance gene pool, as Dr. Vibhu Prakash said, against extinction. The reason why we will never go back to those huge levels of vultures is because when we release vultures back into the countryside, there are multiple threats to vultures. Diclofenac is just one threat. There are other veterinary drugs being used by veterinary doctors which are also poisonous to vultures. So we need to tackle those. Secondly, there are things like wind energy. In Rajasthan, for example, huge windmills are killing the great Indian bustard, which is now down to less than 200 birds in the wilderness. Vultures also crash into high tension wires and die. For example, in Uttarakhand, a few years back, 40 vultures died after they crashed into high tension wires. And you know that high tension wires are now being strung across the countryside to electrify the rural countryside. So that is another threat. The other threat is farmers who don't like their livestock being killed by dogs or predators like big cats. So they poison their carcasses to kill the big cats or the dogs, but vultures die when they feed. For example, in Assam, a few months back, 55 vultures fed on a cow which was laced with poison to kill the dogs which had killed the cow. And out of the 55, a majority of the vultures later died. So what I'm trying to say is that because of the human intrusion into the countryside and into the environment, we are facing multiple threats to our wildlife, and the vultures are a vulnerable species because of this. All large species are facing this threat.
So as I understand it, a huge cost is being incurred in raising and breeding these vultures in captivity. But obviously, keeping them in captivity is not the final goal. So it is extremely important to ascertain what happens to them after they are released. If none of the birds is going to survive after it is being released, then there is little or no point in even breeding them in captivity. I understood from your earlier discourse that to effectively do this, and it is important to do this, otherwise we are not sure whether our experiment has worked or not. To effectively do this, you mentioned that telemetry was required, but you have not got the necessary permissions for this. Can you elaborate a little on that? Who is to accord the permission? What would be the possible reasons for not getting that? Are those valid concerns? And how do we tackle this? Because if we are not able to tackle this, then the whole project per se might well lose its relevance and importance.
Yeah, it's very true that there are a lot of threats to vultures, and when we release them in the wild, there will be problems. But we have a problem and we have to solve it. And so now we have set up conservation breeding centers, vultures are breeding men, now we have to release them back in the wild. So the plan is that we have first released 2 Himalayan griffons, of course without the tags, but for 45 days what we could see is vultures kept in captivity for 10-15 years. When they are released back in the wild, they will fly around, they will find food and survive. That's right. And now, now we are going to release our critically endangered captive bred white-backed vultures. And this we will do with the PTT, with the satellite tags. And you know, the thing is, as Dr. Gujral said, we organized a workshop for all the stakeholders around 100 kilometers from our center. And this was exactly to sensitize them. Then now we are going to release vultures, and we are apprehensive of the threats which Vikramjit Singh just mentioned. And now we are going to do awareness programs, advocacy programs, trying to, first we will collect the basic information on what is there, what the threats are there, how much food is there, how much habitat is there, and all those things, and what is the prevalence of drugs in that area. And after that, we will work on it, we will try to eliminate that. And then once we are reasonably sure that the area is now safe for vultures, we will release the vultures with the PTT, only with the PTT. And with the PTT, the advantage is the satellite tags, then you can find out what is happening. And if they die of diclofenac or any NSA poisoning, we will not release vultures again. We will release them only after removing that threat and going to the government, going to various authorities and making sure that it's not there. And if they die of they running into the power pylon or anything else like that, we will work with the governments. You know, there are ways and means of reducing the threat now. You can, the conductors can be, the distance between conductors can be improved or something. There are many ways of doing it. That we will do it. And then we will start the further release program. This bottleneck of not getting permission for satellite tags, you know, it's with the Department of Telecommunication, and they have to give us a permission to get import and put it on the vultures. So they have been dragging their feet. I am not sure what exactly the reason is, but we are trying to get it. We are now trying to get through the government through the Forest Department, and the Chief Wildlife Officer himself have applied for the permission. And let's hope it comes in.
Real quickly, is there a certain number of vultures, a dream population that you would like to get back up to before you feel you can declare victory? And what is that number roughly? And it's going to take many years, maybe decades. So what is the magic number, if there is one?
Well, you know, when we started off with the conservation breeding program, we took help of various experts and did a mathematical modeling. So, you know, when we started the conservation breeding program, then also the question was how many you should breed. You just can't breed 2 or 3 and then be happy about it. So we did this mathematical model, which told us that we should breed, we should be able to release 600 pairs of each of the 3 species back in the wild.
600 per year?
No, total 600 pairs of each of the 3 species. If we are able to release that in the wild, that will form a genetically viable and self-sustaining population. And to get this 600, to get this 600 pairs, we thought of keeping 25 pairs of each of the 3 species in 6 different centers in the country. And from each center, we thought of producing 100 pairs of all the 3 species from 10 years from the beginning of release program.
Okay.
You know, so it will take, now if we start breeding release program, it will take another 10 years. By the time we will be able to release 100 pairs of each of the 3 species from one center.
So minimum 10 years.
Minimum 10
600 total.
When we start actually the regular release program, we are still on the experiment release program.
And that can only happen after the tagging is approved.
Tagging
and
approved,
regulatory issues.
Exactly, and the environment is safe. Other drugs are removed. Diclofenac is not there, and all that.
Okay.
So can I add to that?
Yeah.
So 600 pairs is obviously 1,200 birds from each species, so 3,600 in total. But you've got to remember as well that by far the biggest threat to these birds is the diclofenac in the cattle carcasses. So we've come a long way with the bans up until the most recent one in 2015, and we have hope that that will reduce diclofenac prevalence in the environment even further than it is than it has been the last 6 months. And with that great threat reduced to negligible amounts, and perhaps yes, there is going to be some other threats and emerging threats as well. Those vultures, even though it might sound like a small number, 3,600, those vultures will be able to multiply by themselves once they're out in the wild. So we're not only releasing birds into an environment to repopulate, but we've also tackled the major threat to these vultures and tried to remove that almost to 100%. And that way, the vultures that we put out there will just multiply as they would have in the days before diclofenac.
I disagree with this assumption that, you know, if we even tackle diclofenac to 100%, which is not a guaranteed thing at the moment, because diclofenac is a very effective drug. It has its cost advantages, it has its efficacy advantages as compared to the other drugs. The second point is that the pharmaceutical industries are pushing the frontiers of their sales and the kind of drugs they're pushing into the veterinary applications. So even if we take out diclofenac, there are other drugs like atropine, isoflurane, and many others which Toby knows better, which are in the market, and there is no guarantee that more such drugs are not going to come in. So I think the viable, feasible way of looking at the future vulture population in the country is a vulture population which is sustainable along the protected areas, the forests or the jungles, where they have wild carcasses to feed on. You know, because the 4 crore vultures which we had in the 1980s were basically feeding and surviving and breeding on a huge availability of the domestic carcasses, which, as we all know and is very well known now, is contaminated by the invasion of the veterinary drugs. So out of the 12 veterinary drugs available in India at the moment which are being used, we know almost for certain that 7 are bad for vultures.
There must be some pushback from Big Pharma. What has their pushback been, if any? They must pay you guys, for example. You've ruined their day.
Yeah.
So what has the pushback been?
Well, you know, the pushback has been that you know, there are various legal challenges to the ban on diclofenac. There are various legal challenges. There also, pharmaceutical industry also works through the government ministries to stymie the effort of conservationists to ban these veterinary drugs. Also, the very crucial implication is that if the drug is benefiting thousands and thousands of farmers and you posit it against benefiting vultures by banning it, it's a very difficult choice again, economically and politically, to make, because after all we are being run by a political dispensation which is more bothered about the votes of the people. And no politician in India likes to challenge the farmer or the rural voter, you know, who will say that I'm getting an efficacious drug at a very good price, and you want to save a few birds and you are banning it. You ban diclofenac, then you say ban this drug because it's bad for vultures, then you say ban this drug which is bad for vultures. So the pushback is coming, as I mentioned, because of legal challenges. The pushback is also coming through an insidious way through the ministries which control the availability of drugs in the market. So there are pushbacks. There are also positive things. There are many people in government which are sensitive, who are concerned about vultures, and there is political will also which is coming to save vultures, like the Haryana CM has been very proactive. He's been lobbying to ban drugs to get more funding for the vultures. So the bottom line, again, as I say, is that if we consider the Indian realities, the Indian conditions, we should not have any false assumptions about the vulture recovery. And this is the question which is going to come up in the future when we start releasing the freed birds back into the wilderness. There are going to be mortalities. There are going to be some disasters. And the media and the public are going to say, you're spending a lot of money on these birds, and we are getting bad results. But we need to tell them that in any experiment which has no previous model for us to work on, because we have captive bred vultures and releasing them in the wilderness, and we really don't know how they're going to react. So we need to take in our stride a few losses, a few disasters, and see the larger and the longer picture.
Having said all that, I'm still very positive about it. First is, vulture is a long-lived body. A healthy individual lives for almost 40 to 45 years. And I go back to my high school days when we were told, when the two elephants live their life, a male and a female, and which is close to 140 years, and every offspring survives, and the pedigree survives, there will be more than 200,000 elephants there. My first observation is, on a positive note, despite diclofenac and other such medicines, there is still a population of 100,000 in void. So in genetics we call that adaptability. So I feel as a forest officer and as a scientist that there is some genetic variability available which is slightly better in terms of its resistance as compared to the population which has died. And if these 600, they survive, and as we said, my colleague said that a 10 years project and we make it more success and learn from the lessons, we'll still have something in the wild will basically complement the population which exists in wild, and their breeding together probably will take the levels to higher level. I agree with my friend that taking it back to 4 crores is a very, very big task, It may not happen in our lifetimes or maybe another 50 years, but still effort has to be made. And I think that's what we say, that is a very, very important and is very significant experiment which has been done. I will say that what is very, very important now is the help of my friends who has been instrumental in giving it a importance and make aware the general public. And I must also thank your newspaper. So this is a beginning. In the last meeting also it came very clearly. For example, we have to write a couple of very popular articles, and publish it in the vernacular dailies in all these 7 states. We may even ask the local governments to give us a little bit of money and go to the schools, because we have seen that in the recent past in India, tapping the resource as in the children, child is father of man, that concept probably will hold good. So I think I'm very positive and optimistic, that this effort which has a history of 15 years as an experiment will see the light of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that when we release the vultures in the wild, there will be mortality. And everywhere where in the world where reintroductions have taken place, very heavy mortality, more than 25, 30, 40% mortality, because birds from captivity, they have been released back to the wild and they are very naive. They are naive and they are mortal. But the positive thing is we will be putting satellite tags in there. And when we release bird and there is a mortality, I assure you that we will not hide it. Mortality for us will give us more opportunity to find out why the bird is dead. And then we'll try to remove that threat. So reintroduction program, apart from increasing the population to a bit, will also give us more insight into the threats which are present for vultures in the environment. So I think I'm quite positive about it that after the first release, when we release about 8 birds, we will get very good results, and then we can improve upon it. And problems are all big, and you have to start somewhere, and you have to keep working on it. So, like we've done it, and we have reached, we have achieved some success in the last 15 years. In 90s, the situation looked absolutely dismal. Because till 2000, we didn't have a clue why the vultures were dying.
I think that we would be happy if we knew that diclofenac was all but gone from the environment, and that no other toxic NSAIDs, similar veterinary drugs, were causing deaths in vultures. We would be happy if we started to see our national population of vultures, the trend for that starting to increase, and so we'd say that the population is increasing. And then further down the track, these things don't happen overnight, but if we can take these 3 species which are now critically endangered, right on the brink of extinction, if we can move them to a more favourable conservation status, least concern, then we would be happy. And that's what we intend to do.
Dr. Gujral, you mentioned the issue of resources also for this project, and I can understand it's a long project which has been carrying on for many years and is expected to carry on for many more. Tentative figures given by you that each bird is costing close to 50,000 rupees or thereabouts, and the ambitious program just for feeding, and your tentative program of the number of releases, I think we are looking at several hundreds of crores of rupees of funding, of resources. So could you give us some idea as to from where these funds are coming, number one? And number two, I noticed that several agencies are working on this project together. There is the Haryana Forest Department, of course. There is the Bombay National History, the NHS, and the Royal Bird Preservation Society from overseas, from UK. So how are you managing, and not to mention so many other NGOs. Vikramjit has been taking an interest in this from almost since its very inception. So there are a lot of players also out here. Are the roles of the different agencies well defined? How do you achieve cohesion and coordination between all concerned? Because no project can really come to a fruitful conclusion unless, one, you have got adequate resources, and number two, there is clarity of purpose, and all the stakeholders and implementers and concerned persons are working as a cohesive one in achieving. So what has been your experience in this till now, and how do you foresee the future, particularly on the resources aspect, because it's critical for any project. Any one of you can take this.
The issue of numbers, I want to say once again, in India we represent 7% of the total human population of the world. We also have more than 16% of the cattle population of the world. So those are the numbers why Vikram was also saying that we had this issue of increase in the number of vultures. Mr. Gujral, you are absolutely right. Initially, it was a very small effort, which was largely supported by donations from the Royal Society of Bird Protection.
And the Darwin Initiative Fund.
And yes.
The UK government was one of the first big donors to this pioneering project in India through the Darwin Initiative Fund, which is the UK government fund. And it is not only the Darwin Initiative Fund or the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds which is involved in this project. There is the Peregrine Fund which is involved. There is a Hawk Conservancy, and very notably Jemima Parry Jones of the International Birds of Prey Center. She comes every year to this project. She inspects every bird. Her devotion to this is also exemplary. Then you have grants from the Rufford grants, the Rufford small grants, they give grants to it. So there is a huge amount of agencies. BirdLife International is involved in this project. So there's a multiplicity of foreign agencies involved, there are donors from abroad, and the question that arose very recently was that the vultures are Indian, they are going to benefit India if we save them. Why is the bulk of the funding coming from foreign agencies? After all, how long can the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds give thousands of pounds to India? So that fortunately that message reached the correct quarters in the government of India and the state governments. And now we are finding that more and more of the funding for vulture conservation, vulture breeding is coming from the state and the central governments. The Central Zoo Authority of India has stepped in. It has set up 4 centers for conservation breeding of vultures, and they are now looking for vultures to come to their centers. They are looking for expertise from the Royal Society, from Vibhu Prakash, to come and teach them how to breed birds. And may I reiterate once again that a big success has been to establish a protocol for captive breeding of vultures. We have a very good protocol now to breed vultures in captivity. It just needs to be replicated at the other centers.
So what Vikram is saying, that the basic research has been done by professionals like BNHS and the people coming from abroad. But now the application part is being supported by Government of India and Haryana government. Not to the extent we would like it to, because it's a big job, but at least a humble beginning has been made. For example, this year only the center has got close to 2 crore 14 lakh rupees, which is I think 20 times more than what this government support was last year for the rearing of, maintenance of and the release of these birds. Also some basic oblique applied research is being sponsored by Government of India. BNHS, us as in Forest Department, and IVRI, Indian Veterinary Research Institute, we are partners in a project which is again sponsored by Government of India, in which we have to go out and actually find out the suitability of the habitats for the newly released birds, and also to find out the suitability and safety of the carcasses with respect to the NSAIDs. So very big beginning has been made, and I think once we spread the word to the rest of the states, each state will come forward, because in terms of, as Vikramji has said time and again, a rural background, this is a very important species. It's a practical species, not the, as he will say, the eye-catching species like tiger and elephant, but farmers do have respect for it. And I think it's also important that the so-called ancient way of Indian system of giving awareness to the common masses on ecological issues was through religion. For example, saying that there are 33 crore devtas means that you have to respect the planets and galaxy and all that. Worshipping a mountain is again important because you want to save that ecosystem. Similarly, in our mythology, in the story of the epic Ramayana, there is a very important role of Vulture, which was named Jatayu, and the center's name is also the Jatayu Conservation and Breeding Center, and it doesn't require a lot of explanation for the Indian people that how important Jatayu was. So it is our way to give a message that the ecological and the importance of this species is very high. Thank you.
When we start to release our vultures back into the wilderness and these birds fly enormous distances, we need to know where they go, where they feed, what threats they are, whether they have died or they're ill. If they're ill, we need to get them back and treat them. But how do we know where they're going? Because they fly enormous distances. They can fly 100 kilometers a day in search of food. We put satellite tags on them, which are very light devices, which tell us the altitude the bird is flying, what speed is flying, what are the micro weather conditions around it. And these satellite tags can last for at least 3 years. The problem which has now arisen in India is that the government of India has put a ban, or it is not allowing the import of these satellite devices. They cite security concerns. They say, the government of India's officials say, that the satellite tag will be put on some bird or some animal, and the neighboring countries which are not very well disposed towards India will secure espionage, or will take defense secrets from India. Now I want to say, when I have discussed this issue with the Government of India and I have discussed this issue with the stakeholders like the VNHS, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the Wildlife Institute of India, whose director has himself written a note to the Government of India saying this is, in so many words, an absurd ban. You see, if it is security, birds are being tagged outside India with satellite tags like the Amur falcon, like the common cuckoo which is tagged in China in near Beijing. The common cuckoo has come to India, which has been tracked, has stayed a few weeks in India and then flown down to Africa. The Amur falcon has also come down to Nagaland with the satellite tag, stayed in Nagaland for some weeks and flown down to Africa. Now my question is it not a security threat then? Are we to ban these birds? Are we to have a radar ringing India and we see a bird tagged with a satellite and we stop it or kill it or hit it with an anti-aircraft gun? Are we to do that? The problem which is occurring now in India is the overall scenario of nationalistic defense concerns which are coming to a high because of very high tensions on our borders. So for example, when a pigeon comes in from Pakistan with a Pakistani tag or some mobile number written on it, you know, it creates a furor in the media and the police and the intelligence bureau and the RAW, which is India's external agency, that this pigeon is acting as a spy for Pakistan. So you well imagine that this is just an ordinary pigeon with a tag on it, and you put a bird with a satellite tag on it, and you know the public gets very hyped up about it. The security agencies got hyped up about it. So we need to address these concerns and show that satellite tagging of birds is of absolutely no threat because it is not a voice download. There is no voice downloads from it or anything. It is just telling you the bird's location. There is no camera fitted on it, which will as the bird flies over, say, the Indian airfields or some Indian radar installation, they will take pictures and relay them back. What the Government of India's Ministry of Communications official told me was that we don't want satellite downloads outside India. That means if we fit a bird with a satellite tag, its download should not be outside India. Okay, so we need to address these concerns. Maybe we reassemble them in India, the satellite tag, get an Indian satellite to download them or whatever. My information is that this matter has been discussed at the level of the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Communication, Government of India very recently at the level of the Additional Secretary, and there is some positive optimism coming out that we will start allowing these satellite tags to be put not only on vultures, it's not just vultures, the great Indian bustard for example, the other threatened species, tigers for example, all this has been held up. But vultures, I again reiterate, we need quick permission for these satellite tags because this project is got completely held up because of this. The vultures are ready for release, we have groomed them for release, everything is ready, only this part of the jigsaw puzzle is missing.
So the satellite tags that we want to use on the vultures are the best that we can find. The best equipment out there at present. The tags themselves have a GPS locating device which enables them to get for us to get data on the vulture's location to about 3 meters. They have solar power solar cells on them, so they solar power themselves. They're guaranteed to live for these devices the longevity of these devices is 3 years guaranteed, but we expect that they'll go for a few years beyond that. The data is collected and transmitted to a constellation of satellites known as Argos, which is a constellation of satellites used throughout the world for collecting environmental data. So this, the whole history behind this constellation of satellites is purely for environmental research. So animals are being tracked all around the world using this system. They also use it for measuring environmental things like different parameters from oceans and from the air. So it's a very common and standard system that's used throughout the world. The devices will give us, as I said, pinpoint accuracy of where the birds are. They will also allow us to follow the birds from our laptops and at our desks. We obtain the data in essentially real time. We're only a couple of hours behind the bird, and therefore we can actually head out into the field and follow the bird. And BB's team have practiced following the birds, and they've got the skills that they can use in this to track the birds on the ground in real time. And that ability enables us to see exactly how the release program's going. So we can collect all sorts of data. We can collect data on where the birds are roosting, where they're feeding. We can also find out where they're nesting, and we can notify the public that the bird is in that area, and grow further and further support and engagement from the community. If something should happen and our birds perhaps have injured themselves or have become sick, we can also go straight to them and if need be, recapture them, take them back and give them the necessary treatment, whether it be veterinary or husbandry that they require. And as we've also mentioned today, if the bird did die, we can also pinpoint that carcass and go straight to it, collect it, do the post-mortem examination, find out what the cause of death is, and then deal with that problem.
Action.
There is a great absurdity woven into this permission for satellite tagging. The law or the policy that the government of India is now citing to not allow the import of satellite tags has actually been in existence for the last 20 years. But that was never implemented. So for the last 20 years, we were importing satellite tags and fitting them onto birds and animals, and nobody said a damn thing. One fine day, the Wildlife Trust of India was importing the same satellite tags, and somebody at the government said, "How are you importing? There's a law against it." So they said, "From now on, we are not allowing anybody because this is the law." So that means in the last 20 years, the satellite tags that came in, they were illegal.
Was it a case that the officer who made this decision that person was wrong, or is it literally, as you say, that it was illegal the entire time and nobody cared?
Nobody cared. Suddenly one day they woke up and said, "Oh, how are you importing? This is not allowed." So it was not that they've set up a new law right now. It was always there, they never enforced it. For 20 years they were importing satellite tags and nobody said a damn thing. So this is absurd, you know. And I know that wildlife conservationists, when they try and battle these absurdities in the system, it is almost a Gargantuan task. It requires a hell of a lot of patience and fortitude to tackle this kind of thing. And I think all credit to them that they've got this far with their permissions and their bans and getting all this. It's not an easy task. It's easier to face tigers and see vultures in the wilderness than to tackle these nuances of policy, if you put it very charitably.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, quick question for all of you. Individual answers, please. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being total failure, 10 being your complete success, where would you rate this effort now? Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
About 5.
5?
Yeah.
So 50, halfway there?
Yeah.
Okay. You, sir?
See, we have to learn from Vulture, which is a patient word, So we have a long way to go, but I think we are between 5 and 6 right now. And I'm very hopeful that Vulture will not go the way Dodo World went, And I'm reasonably confident that the way you are giving us time and these conferences are happening, it is already, on 27th and 28th, we have a meeting in Bombay where people from 7 different countries will be there. So it is gaining momentum, and will, I'll not say gallop, but will at least trot and reach our goal very soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I would say 6.
6. So we have 1 vote for 5, 1 for 5 to 6, let's say 5.5, and you say 6. and user?
I'll be the optimist. I'll say 7.
7.
Yeah, because I believe the current ban that came out in 2015, which is a ban on multi-dose vials of human diclofenac, the diclofenac that was being misused in livestock. If that ban holds, I believe that will reduce the amount of diclofenac that actually is used in veterinary care, and with that, and I believe that the vultures will have a better chance of surviving. Yes, there's a lot of other work to do, but because diclofenac is our biggest problem, I think with that ban we can actually we can feel a bit happier about the situation.
Okay, so if
Optimistic.
okay,
I think I am going to be the most charitable and most liberal, and I can afford to be because I am not directly involved in the implementation of this project. I'd like to say that this entire team, which is dedicating its time, energy, resources, working on this problematic issue, despite great odds, whenever you grade something, you have to see what are the constraints and what are the resources available. So given the constraints and given the resources available, I would definitely give this team and this project over 8 in its efforts so far, and I would wish it all the best to continue on this track with all vigor and energy. Thank you.
Thank you.
okay. As we wrap this up, and thanks very much for taking your valuable time to talk to Daily World and communicate to the global community out there what the issues are concerning this subject, and reversing the catastrophe that has happened with the vulture species in India. If there's any one message that you want people watching this show to come away with and understand, what would that message be?
What a very complex task of wildlife conservation or saving our species in what you call a very human-dominated and human-intrusive environment is. That we can't leave it just to the government, to the NGOs, a few concerned people, to a few scientists. Every citizen who is concerned about the environment can contribute to this effort. For example, the Vulture Conservation Project is open to public funding. If you're concerned about vultures enough, why not just contribute just 100 rupees? If you go into the countryside, if you see vultures dying, or you see any other wildlife dying or poached, or people harassing it or not doing anything about it because you're literate, you read that you need to save the species, you could just go and brief the people or just share your ideas with them and try and change mindsets. So I think that way we build up a momentum where all of us get involved in saving our planet, because we all use the planet, but we leave the responsibilities to a few.
I think every species is important. The conservation programs should not only focus on the so-called flagship species or indicator species. They should be comprehensive. As we are talking in terms of forestry, the landscape approach, we should also talk about wildlife conservation in terms of the comprehensive approach. The individualistic efforts for a particular species to complete the chain or pyramid of ecology is very, very important. But a comprehensive project is much more important. We should also learn a lesson for our posterity that we should not keep waiting till we have only few individuals to be left. We should plan, comprehend, and monitor for each and every species. Otherwise, again, I'll reuse the word, we can also become dodo birds in very, very little time. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to say that conservation of biodiversity is very important, and that means that monitoring of biodiversity. You must know what is happening. And other things, if we are responsible citizens, law-abiding citizens, then most of the conservation issues will probably not arise or not at this magnitude. Like if we have been following laws and buying drugs on prescription, or we treat animals on whatever is prescribed and do the practice, things will not go as bad as it went for the vultures.
Vultures as a group globally are actually the most endangered group of birds there are. But problems elsewhere in the world, for instance in Africa, are very much more complicated than what we see here in India. Here in India, the major threat is toxic veterinary drugs. And so if we could only get on top of that, we could see vultures returning in reasonable numbers in the wild. So to do that, we need to engage everyone. But it's not just the communities, the local people, but also those people who have the power to make big differences. So people like the pharmaceutical, that work in the pharmaceutical industry, and also drug control here in India. So if we could get the engagement of not only the local people, but also those decision makers, we could make a big difference for vultures in this country.
So I would only say that this discussion has been quite an eye-opener for me too. Though I'm presently the CEO of Daily World newspaper, prior to this I have retired as the Principal Chief Conservator of Forest Punjab. And I must confess I had no real idea as to what was the enormity of this problem and what were the steps being taken to overcome this problem. I am really impressed by the dedication, the scientific zeal, and the perseverance. I believe this program was initiated way back in 2000 or thereabouts. And you know, I'm reminded of what a very great man, Bertrand Russell, once said, that true courage is not the ability to go down in a battlefield in a blaze of glory with guns and trumpets blazing. True courage is the ability to put one's best foot forward, even if you know it may not be good enough. And I think this is exactly what is being exhibited by all the people working quietly, seriously, diligently on a project which most would consider not very romantic, not of earth-shattering magnitude, but to keep working so zealously, diligently and honestly on this project. It is a wonderful job, and I wish and pray that all of you continue to exhibit the same thing in the years to come. Thank you.
Thanks.